This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. Tim, I've got to ask you.
Please, please.
You're a man with much experience.
Okay.
Have you yet experienced restless anal syndrome?
Fortunately not. I didn't know about it.
Well, I'm here to tell you all about. Fortunately, I just got my booster, so I hope I'm not going to be hit by this. So, there's
Got your booster. Congratulations.
I know. I can. So, I mean, every day there's more like scary things about COVID-19 side effects, and but this is kind of one of the more interesting. So, a male patient who'd been suffering something called restless anal syndrome after he contacted the virus. And before anybody starts to panic, it's a very rare effect. It's kind of similar to restless leg. So a 77-year-old Japanese man was hospitalized, poor guy, for 21 days with COVID-19. And then after being discharged, however, he began to experience restless, deep anal discomfort between his anus and his genitals.
So he was discharged, but he wasn't discharging anything.
Well, he felt like
he felt like he was. Right.
He felt like he had the need to poop, but he couldn't do it. Yeah. And it seems.
Anyway, is this a neurological thing that's already exists and just happens?
Well, they just say it's a very rare condition, but it is similar to restless leg syndrome, which is characterized by an irresistible or unpleasant urge to move your legs that typically peaks in the late afternoon, evening hours. But the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke notes that, restless leg syndrome is classified as a sleep disorder, since it often happens when you're sleeping. A movement disorder. But anyway, this poor guy just
felt like he had to make a bowel movement.
Didn't know what to do. And this went on for quite a while. So anyway, if you haven't had it, you're probably not going to get it.
I haven't had it. Now do receivers in the act of sodomy or anal sex specifically, do they also get it? They're like, it's not like, I'm not making a bowel movement. I feel like someone's doing me. Is that?
I don't. Well, maybe your anus might twitch in the hopes that somebody does you.
What are you talking about?
Anyway, the doctor had to do a colonoscopy, and it did reveal that he had internal hemorrhoids, and I guess they were just, twitching and squirming around inside. Poor guy. Anyway, there's all kinds of things, happening. I mean, some people with COVID, loss of appetite, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. Fortunately, we've had none of these symptoms because so far so good. We haven't contacted COVID.
No, we have not.
Oh, praise the gods.
People I have, but so far, and you're about to go to Europe, and we did the whole kind of like a little red state belt tour, and we kind of came out COVID free. And
look, my thing is I'm just going to get tested every week because it's what you got to do, and that's just the way it is.
Different countries in Europe, they charge different things. I mean, the general cost I find like near those airports is about, although in Germany, it was free. Germany was free, but other countries, the average cost $50-$60 if you have to just get one.
Well, the thing is, as a professor or a doctor or somebody that teaches workshops, that's how I was able to get the booster. It's like,
well done.
I teach in workshops. I'm going to be in front of students. Got to do it. So anyway, I'm feeling pretty good. And I thought, why not get it right before I leave, as well as, the negative test. So all good.
So all good, but not so good for Jonathan Tovey and his wife, Diana, 42, 45. Yes, both former U.S. Navy nuclear engineer officers. And they just got busted by the FBI in a espionage sting.
The sandwich. Is that you're getting into the sandwich?
No. They were selling. No, they were selling. No, I wasn't talking about the sandwich.
Wait. Because I think they were smuggling secrets in a sandwich.
Well.
Update. Go ahead.
I actually didn't get a detail, but they were definitely selling secrets to an undercover FBI agent, which is, I guess, very settling when people in that position of power are willing just to hand over atomic secrets for weapons and for money, I guess. But those people are fucked, basically. I mean,
word on the street, or from my local food vendors, food trucks, they were smuggling secrets in sandwiches. Now, you've never seen me eat a sandwich.
I guess that's another way of call that. That's another form of a secret sauce, basically.
Well, speaking of things that are terrifying and secretive, this is really kind of horrifying to me. Flying microchips the size of a sand grain could be used for population surveillance. It's not
they're nano drones. Is that what it is? Like,
not a bird or a plane, but a winged microchip as small as a grain of sand can be carried by the wind as it monitors such things as, population levels and the spread of airborne diseases. So these microflyers, they were developed at Northwestern University, detailed in an article in Nature this week, and they're being billed as the smallest ever human-made flying structures. They don't have a motor. Engineers were instead inspired by the maple tree's free-falling propeller seeds, technically known as Samara fruit. And the engineers optimized the aerodynamics of the microflyer so that as these structures fall through the air, the interaction between the air and those wings cause a rotational motion that creates a very stable, slow falling velocity.
It's like a glider.
It's a glider. Now, you know me, I prefer sugar gliders.
Well,
microscopic gliders that can tell everybody where you are at any time.
I read an article in Scientific American years ago about just the race for these nano drones and surveillance, and basically they're just going to continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller to hypothetically like the size of blood cells, entering receptors in your brain, triggering religious experiences, just perceptual. I mean, just really, it's going to get fucking more and more and more nuts. Speaking of nuts, a man in Harlem was on the M60 bus here, our public transportation, Manhattan bus lines, and he entered, and the bus driver says, "Sir, you have to wear a mask because that's just the rules for
practical reality
when you're riding on the bus or on any of the public transportation in New York." But then he goes into some kind of temper tantrum. You can't tell me what to do. Everyone's crammed in there just working their crappy jobs. Like, you really gonna slow this up? Blah blah blah. And then it just keeps on escalating into just complete temper tantrum insanity. So the guy who's not wearing a mask decides the bus is moving at this point. He tries to escape through the emergency window on top. Those little like emergency windows.
Oh wow!
I think he ends up jumping off. But people were trying to stop him, protect him, and he's like scratching and kicking. And I just don't understand. You can make your life a little easier. This reminded me of a story. Just in general, you don't use those kind of roof emergency windows. You don't use them unless you really have to, especially when it's moving. I remember it was something like 10 years ago, and it stuck in my mind because it was like it's this absurdist horror movie scenario. Some high school from Westchester or something was coming down to New York to do one of their little field trips, and the chaperones and the bus driver just didn't have the high school kids under control. They're all like, just partying and doing their thing. And someone, while I was moving down on the Cross Bronx Expressway, aka 95 full highway, they were someone had removed that little ceiling glass, and they're all kind of like poking their heads up while I was moving, and they're all laughing. And so then finally one guy just poked it up, and all of a sudden a headless torso just drops to the floor, like geysers of guts coming out of his neck. I was like, because basically those buses are basically just like 6 inches a foot from an overpass or really high up there. And he just put it up just when they're about to just go underneath one of those things, and just full on pumpkin explosion. His whole head just bursts out, just decapitated. So for all you kids and anti-maskers who like to throw temper tantrums in public transportation, don't open the emergency window on the ceiling of a moving bus.
Jamie, if they've already lost their minds, they might as well lose their head. That's the way I look at it. All right, speaking about losing your mind, an article just published in the Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Process sheds new light on the impact of thinking about God and creativity. Now, new research provides that evidence that thinking about God can stifle the creativity of believers, particularly among those who adopt a passive follower mindset right. After contemplating their creator. So, I mean, non-believers, when they think about God, it doesn't stifle their creativity. But according to an assistant professor at the University College of London School of Management, there's a growing demand to give believers the latitude to express their faith at work, which means people can spend some of their time thinking about God.
Yes.
But that is going to impact their performance, which is quite strange. They found that belief in God was associated with reduced creative ability, but only when a religious individual had been directed to actively think about God. Oh, well, so it's nothing I didn't,
do you think really pious people in general would get defensive if they heard that little study?
I get defensive against pious people that wear gowns and practice pedophilia is what I get defensive against. Okay. Private First Class Jennifer Sewell is confirmed to be safe and with family after going AWOL from Fort Hood, where 39 people enlisted have disappeared or died in the last year. Fort Hood officials confirmed that, she was safe, but soldiers died or went missing, including 13 who killed themselves and 5 who were killed. So there's, and a lot of them are female soldiers and some are male soldiers. And it just goes to show that, we know that war is murder, but preparing to be a soldier now can put you at risk of rape, disappearance, murder, suicide, just unbelievable. And of course, who is facing disciplinary actions? And is this gal that disappeared for a while, is she going to face disciplinary action? Maybe she was running away from somebody that was trying to kill her.
Well, there are stalkers. Something's going on in Fort Hood because there's like all these homicides. Is there like a serial killer on the grounds of Fort Hood? I mean, these things are cities within themselves. And there's that woman that was kind of had a stalker. And I think she'd been raped by some guy and then he ended up killing her there.
39 people missing, disappeared, suicided. The thing is, mystery or not, this is only the tip, not even the tip of the iceberg, because we're not even talking about, we're talking about maybe pre-PTSD, because we know how many veterans come back with problem, the rate of suicide. First of all, if you're sent out to murder people, it might make sense that eventually you might just say, I'm a fucking asshole and I'm going to take myself out.
Well, it wasn't that part of what Kubrick was expressing with Full Metal Jacket, that the first half is that, this was Paris Island off of South Carolina. But the point being, the point was, as in the process of transforming these boys into just war machines, basically, for better or for worse, brainwashing or I don't know, it's making them so submissive, making them fall in line. You're going to have, that was more dangerous for some people than actually fucking going to Nam. It was literally boot camp. And that does happen. They own you once you're signed up, you can just, they got you, they own you. So
yeah, it's just astonishing to me that with all the technological advances civilization has made, we've yet failed to progress as far as civility, human rights, the protection of the individual, women, children, innocent male civilians of the planet. And that brings us to our guest today, which I'm very proud and excited to have Mariam Atash, civil rights attorney, experience in legal, business, governmental relationships, diplomacy, media, nonprofit sectors. And Mariam has been working for decades for the rights of people, for us to better understand what's actually going on in Afghanistan. She has many foundations that she works for, just trying to improve the literacy rate of children and help women start businesses. She served on the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Afghans Women's Council, and the United States Institute of Peace, Gender and Law Working Group since 2008. She's just an amazing human rights activist. And I think we're really lucky to have some of her time to help us understand exactly what's going on right now in Afghanistan. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, a very special guest today, Mariam Atash and Zohra, her sister Atash, who's we have an attorney, civil rights activist. Mariam has done so much. I can't even begin to recite her resume, because first in law, then in small business for Afghani women, and working with children, working for immigration, working with the US government, trying to improve relations, trying to help people to understand exactly what's going on. They're working with the US Department of State's US Afghan Women's Council. And I just can't even imagine how you feel with the recent events in Afghanistan. I mean, obviously, in probably your entire lifetime, it's just been one impossible thing to comprehend and sort out. I don't even know how you do it. Welcome, Mariam. Tell me what you're involved with right now and help us to understand exactly what's going on and what we can do to help.
Well, thank you, Lydia, for having me on your program and for caring about what's happening. I think what's happening there is something that we as Americans should care about. Obviously, there was a special link between the two countries that I'll mention a few of those, and then I'll go into what am I doing now. Interestingly, the US and Afghan history has spanned many decades. And during the time of President Eisenhower, Afghanistan's king actually wanted to have closer relations with the US. At that time, then it wasn't seen as a strategic good move for the US. Hence, the former USSR stepped in and started giving aid for development. And we saw where that went in the Cold War. And Afghans were the ones, I remind Americans very politely that Afghans fought for their freedom. And when I say that, they look at me and say, when? No, they didn't. How did that happen? And I said, if you go back and you remember the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the plan had been to take over that country, Pakistan, and rest of the world. And it was during that time that millions of Afghans died, children became maimed in landmines, and there was this huge refugee population that was created and displaced. And from that, time in that conflict, Americans didn't have to fight. It was very interesting. I interviewed for the show that I was hosting, Charlie Wilson. It was his last interview before he passed away. It was about 2009. And he said, there was not one uniformed US soldier who died in that struggle. So it was a proxy war. In the essence, the US benefited. They gave those Stinger missiles during the time of Reagan. And it was the Afghans who fought for the freedom of Americans. And after that, the Berlin Wall, great city of music, Berlin, the Berlin Wall fell down. Eastern Europe got its freedom. And the Soviet Union, became different countries and now Russia. And it was in that vacuum of time that the US could have stepped in and didn't.
What years exactly, Mariam? Give us, the dates. It's very important to know this too.
That was, the Soviet invasion happened in 1979, and that's when we left. My grandfather was a 3-star general who opposed the Soviet communist regime, and he was in prison. And later, after 9/11, we kind of found his death warrant when they were going through records at the Ministry of Interior. And it was until 89, it was a 10-year period. And, during this evacuation or, withdrawal that happened of the US, I was thinking back to the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan. If we're going to create parallels, I think it was different, but the US withdrawal was so disorganized, with lack of planning and and lack of respect actually for our flag. And that's why many veterans are upset. And when the US withdrew in February of 1989, they actually did a very orderly, they took their tanks, they had their flag, and they left. That was 89. From 89 to 92, there were all these factions that were being supported by neighbors. So Afghanistan, let's think about where it is on the map. And I like to remind people that it is a place with thousands of years of history. Some of the world's oldest oil paintings were found there. There was always art. It was the central of civilizations from east to west. It's the heart of Asia. And so many empires flourished there and had their downfall there over history. And so that's why it's a very rich archaeological site. it really pains me to think of all the sites that were ruined in these bombings, but for world heritage, for all of us collectively as human beings today to know, what was there. But in that period, we're in a neighborhood that is very difficult. We've got Iran, we have Pakistan versus India, then we have China, and we have now Russia. And so we're in a neighborhood where these different countries want to support different groups because they think it'll be to their benefit. So in that period, there was a power vacuum, there was a civil war, the destruction of Kabul city happened. And that's how the Taliban 1.0 kind of came into power. They were supported in these madrasas in the northwest frontier of Pakistan. And as Americans, I think we need to be reminded what role we've had in these different issues, right? At times, I think we just look at the outcome or the results and we don't think, well, what did we do? And what we did was that we funded these madrasas to create fighters, right? During the war against the Soviet Union, a lot of these young boys were brainwashed. But then after we left and we said this country, we're not going to redevelop it or reconstruct it, then you still had these places. And unfortunately, the Pakistani Inter-Services Agency, which is like their CIA, they've had an issue with Afghanistan, which is that Durand line. It's the border demarcation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if you take that and give the border back to the pre-Durand days, it would be half of Pakistan was actually Afghan territory. So if anybody's wondering why Pakistan has an interest, that's the major one. So this has been an issue. And so in 1993, the treaty was going to be up. It was a 100-year treaty. And hence, Pakistan supported these fighters to work for them and go in and become the Taliban. And some of them, we shouldn't paint things in one big brush. Some people thought I'm bringing law and order because it had gotten very bad in Kabul and other places just were lawless. So there was crime and rape and different human rights violations going on by these different militant gangs, if you will. And so when the Taliban arose to power in 1996, it was, oh, we're going to bring law and order. And some Afghans welcomed that. They wanted law and order. So they thought that that's what they would do. From 96 to 2001, for those who followed world events in that part of the world saw that they were oppressing women. And I think it was the issue of women's rights and some of the images that came out. Sometimes it takes just one powerful image to stay in people's minds around the world. And there was an image of this woman in the former soccer stadium and with a gun to her head. And it was for some retribution for a crime, but it was that image that caught a lot of people's attention. And it was really the pressure of some women's groups that said, we should rethink, because the US wanted to do an oil deal with the Taliban at the time, and there were different views on that. And then 9/11 happened, and, the US went to Afghanistan saying that we're going against these terrorists that are responsible for 9/11. Although interestingly, I was watching some interviews, and there was an interview of a Talib leader who came into DC a few months before 9/11. And he was saying, we want evidence against this person, and we want to work with the US because if we're going to expel him or try him, we want to have evidence. So there was a lot happening before the US went into Afghanistan that, many of us really weren't following. I had been following it at the time because I had wanted to go to Afghanistan that year to visit these orphanages and schools that I had, was on a committee for a student organization, and we had been raising funds, and that's why I knew the Taliban was there and we weren't able to go. So US comes in and says, okay, we're going to rid the country of the Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And so for that, we're going to work with the Afghans. And that's when the Afghans, again, became their allies against this common enemy. And we have all these years, and a lot of mistakes were made. There was a lot of corruption that the US government knew about. I took some specific cases to the attention of the Special Inspector General's office, and I did not feel there was a commitment to doing anything. It was kind of like, oh, whoever can help us for right now, we'll work with them.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt for one second, Mariam, because to count on the US government to go in and try to end corruption, to me, is a perverse concept. And when the corruption is from the top down, how could you not expect people on the ground to become a criminal element when everything in a lawless land, see, we disguise our lawlessness in business suits.
You know, there was corruption happening on the US side as well, because sometimes people just say, oh, those Afghan people, they're corrupt. They actually, what I saw, because I was working in different capacities, and this is what I saw. Oh, the US government's not going to check on that. Okay, then I guess it's not important and we don't need to do that. So we created a culture and an environment where corruption was allowed, and that flourished. Because look, at the end of the day, I would tell policymakers, you can force people to do things if you're the one giving the money. So if you don't, agree with something, then just use the funding as a means to change the behaviors.
Do you think Afghanistan could have liberated itself from USSR invasion without American involvement?
I think it could have happened, but it would have taken a lot longer time, because the Afghans have the will, if they believe that there is a foreign occupation, they will do the long haul battles. And at that time, the Mujahideen, were different groups, but working together, mainly in some provinces in the mountains. But the Soviet Union was wreaking a lot of havoc. I mean, they were using landmines that were the small ones, butterfly mines, I remember, were being thrown from helicopters that were causing people to lose their limbs. So they were, had really ruthless attacks against the population, civilians, not just the military, because their thing was, oh, these people are just looking like they're normal people. There's no army, right? So this is not a regular army effort, because they had overtaken the Afghan government. People should also know that it was Afghans, also communists, working with the Soviet Union. I don't want to make it seem like it was just Russians there. No, there were Afghans that were working with them. And I actually cautioned when I was doing more policy work that, I hope one day the US doesn't replace what the USSR was, meaning that the Afghan communists are kind of seen as then the problem. And it kind of unfortunately happened that way, because if we are not on the side of right, at the end of the day, we are going to create new enemies, and those enemies will have a valid reason to not support us or go after us. But going to your question, I do think the Afghans could have defeated the Soviet Union, but it would have likely have taken a long time, right? So instead of 10 years, it might have been this 20-year timing, but it was those Stinger missiles that Reagan allowed the Afghan Mujahideen to use that went against the Soviet helicopter and air power that really did, I think, the most damage to their campaign. And they started realizing that, they did not want to continue having losses, because there was a lot of Russians, Soviet soldiers at that time sent that didn't really believe in that cause. They did not really want to be there. So when your own army doesn't want to be somewhere, it's hard to continue that.
And let me just ask, let me just ask this. Who is the enemy anyway? This is the issue, I think. And this is the issue because, in my opinion, having lived here my whole life and knowing that there's still 800 military bases, and America is the biggest industrial military complex, incarcerating more of our own people than anywhere else, and allowing more murder in this country, and then exporting war as we have forever as a country founded on murder. I mean, the question does become, who is the enemy? And at one time you have Bush giving Osama bin Laden $43 million. Who could use that much heroin? I have no idea. To do what? Against who? And to me also, it's like, as somebody who is, a war whore, in the sense that it is not ever my war, but I always have to speak out against it. It's just, who is the enemy? The enemy, to me, God, land, oil. Get out of other people's land, leave their oil alone. And my God versus your God is never a battle that's going to be won. So that's just my opinion. Please help me, Mariam. Help me, Mariam. Help me, Mariam.
Thank you. I think it is, again, what's happening in Afghanistan is an example of some of the issues that we as a country need to look at from within. And Timothy, I was thinking agenda points. Your second point about Charlie Wilson, I didn't answer, and I'll just say briefly, I met him, and he was a great person. And I think he was really trying to relay what was going on the ground and the need for the US to provide more covert operations. But in the end, the sad part of that story is that he became a lobbyist for Pakistan. And in that period, where we needed someone like Charlie Wilson to advocate for Afghans. Because Pakistan had more resources, they kind of hired him as a lobbyist. So he spent about 10 years being a paid lobbyist in Washington for Pakistan, which we're not against our neighbors.
Corrupt in itself.
Well, I mean,
right, but it's interesting. It's like, as you're seeing, as we're seeing right now, just what's going on in Congress right now, and just all the issues about, can you be a part of a finance committee and still do insider trading? In other words, being a lobbyist, just the fact that he could get that job afterwards, it just seems like it's a rotten infrastructure to begin with. But
exactly.
Maybe I don't know. It just seems like
there should be periods of times of not being able to lobby for, and that's lobbying for a whole country or government. And Afghans, they want to get along with their neighbors. They want to be in peace. And Afghanistan never invaded its neighbors in its history. And it during the king's time, from 1920s to even the Soviet invasion, Afghanistan had a non-interventionist policy. And so that, they just didn't have a chance.
So if the United States came in during, the 80s and during all that, how much have Russia been involved in Afghanistan when we kind of gone in post 9/11?
Exactly. And also, part two of that is this. I'm sorry. Why the hell are we in there? First of all, we need to know, because we don't, what the natural resources are in Afghanistan, which it is loaded with them, because America doesn't go in to help anyone. They don't help their own country for the most part. We see the division of what's happening here now. So forget going after the Russians. What exactly are the natural resources in Afghanistan that all of this fighting, besides its territory, besides the terrain it occupies, what are we going in there really after? The way that we know that China has gone into many parts of Africa for rare minerals. What are we after? Americans, what are we after?
Right. Afghanistan being a mountainous country in, again, the center of these different civilizations, has had a lot of resources. And interestingly, because it hasn't been able to extract them, it's one of the world's richest countries in terms of resources. The US Geological Survey has done surveys, and they've gone between 3 to almost 30 trillion. I mean, once you get to the trillions, the difference is hard to say, but trillions, not billions. And those studies were actually based on, guess whose studies? The former Soviet studies. Okay, so Soviet Union was interested in uranium in the country, natural gas, and access to a warm water port, which they never got. So Afghanistan has natural gas. It doesn't have much oil reserves, but it has most of the most valuable minerals in the world, from copper to iron to lithium to cobalt, and interestingly, talc. I saw a report which was very interesting, that there's another group, these groups that have these labels. One is called ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan. Khorasan is a former ancient civilization that existed, and they actually kind of take control of a talc mountain. There's a mountain in Afghanistan, and talc is used in all these products. And so a lot of these quote unquote terrorist groups, if we really dig further, what are they actually after as well, right? Is it just an ideology, or they?
What about the black market trade and heroin and poppies and stuff like that? I mean, that's
wait,
massive.
Mariam, finish that thought, and then we'll go back to the heroin. What are they after? Ideological correction, rights against wrongs, my God versus your God, or this talc mountain is mine? And, can you blame a country that has been devastated by outside forces from wanting to reclaim what they have? I mean, why did we get rid of our good friend for a while, Saddam Hussein? He said, get out of my oil fields, and then he's dead. So
yes, and that the complicating factor, Lydia, is that I wish that we have some good leaders in Afghanistan who, if they had gotten power, they could have taken the country in a better direction. But when we came in there after 9/11, we chose to work with warlords who were like criminal thugs, like cartel thugs that were killing people left and right. So we chose to work with them because they would be good fighters against Al-Qaeda, right? And then those same people then became the enemy later. And it was the same thing about going against the Taliban. Now the Taliban's back. So I think as Americans, we have to, I don't like to tell people what to think, Lydia. I think every person.
Oh, I think somebody has to, because we're not getting any straight answers. And that's why we have you on this
I can have my
podcast. Thank you very
opinion.
much.
Okay. My opinion is that we need to really think about these labels because it's used to create fear. Okay. Oh,
So the next boogeyman. It's always who's the next boogeyman?
So, but what are we doing behind the scenes? And sometimes it's like this, okay? We have a government, but government is a bunch of buildings with computers. And at the end of the day, you have people working in these offices, right? You'll have people take control of a certain element of government for their purpose. So it's not as if our government is so organized, it has one plan. Sometimes we wish it could be that organized, right? So I saw situations in Afghanistan where certain things were reported to the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the US Department of Justice did not want to prosecute because they were told by some other agency that we can't go against those folks or individuals. So I was at first shocked about this. Then I said, okay, this makes sense. This makes sense why we are not on the same page. So at the time, we as a government gave money to warlords. It was like Warlord Inc., right? I'm a warlord and I just make a company. And
it's the mob to the mob, to mob resources.
And I'm contracting with the US government, providing them with services, right? And I was told, oh, well, they can get things done. And I said, well, why are you rewarding? These people should have been put in transitional justice trials. That's how Afghanistan could have healed, because if you're going to reward the ones who violated people's rights, then you're giving the wrong message, you're setting the wrong precedent, and you can't build a good house on a bad foundation. So Lydia, I was just going to say that, it's not a situation where I can say, oh, okay, the Taliban really represent the Afghan people and they were trying to get rid of the bad US. No, the Taliban, there are some people who have an ideological issue that they're like, this is a foreign occupation. We want the soldiers out. There's some element that is ideological. The rest is a resource-driven agenda funded by Pakistan ISI. Where are they getting, I have clients, I'm doing immigration work. 3 days after the Taliban came to town, they were searching offices of people. They don't, where did they get that information before they came? Obviously, they had to have sophisticated intel to know where these US government offices, of contractors were. So it's a resource-driven issue. For Pakistan, it's, yes, they might be interested in resources. They're more interested in land, as you said, keeping Afghanistan unstable so they can, not have this land issue instead of resolving it, peacefully. And, China is now looking at, they've already recognized the Taliban government and they want to do mining deals. And,
but what about controlled risks? I mean, this is ultimately, you have all the resources in the world, but you have to bring in all these controlled risk experts, because if you can't get access to it because of just a collapsing society, infrastructure, or just war, whatever it is, it's all ultimately doesn't have the value that the projections are making.
Right. I wish that, at some point, if everyone could just have done business and said, okay, we want this, let's negotiate so we can have peace and secure these areas and there could be a fair deal, it would have led to a lot of resources for the Afghan people and we wouldn't have needed outside aid. But because of these, battles going on, it doesn't allow for it, like you said, to really even allow anyone. Chinese tried to do copper mining, but they were trying, in the process, it would have affected some very historic archaeological sites. So that was stopped. But Afghanistan's resources, it's almost like a savings deposit, if you will, of world, and it's going to get more and more valuable as resources otherwise dwindle down. So yes, you're right. It has not gotten to the point where even a small fraction of what's there is even really benefit anyone. But even if you're talking small fractions of trillions,
the point of it at the bottom of it all is who profits the most from doing the most damage. And that is always going to be the industrial military complex of America, who will go in and destroy entire countries for supposedly ideological reasons, which is bullshit, because where have we rebuilt back? Vietnam, because it's now a tourist destination. So we're going to go in and destroy.
Germany. You say Germany and Japan.
Well, let's talk the last 50 years. Okay. But yeah, and the great tourist destinations and also moderate places. What at the end of the day does the invaders want? people in their own country want, leave us alone, let us go on. Nobody sits in their own country unless, well, Americans do, and say, actually, we want war.
But let me give you a little insight, because the picture is a little more nuanced here. And this is where Afghans, including my own family, felt that we wanted the US there, which was this. Most Afghans did not see the US as invaders because they did not want Al-Qaeda there. They did not want ISI there. So they were looking to work together with the US to get rid of these groups and to have a better government in place. And there were a lot of good leaders who were honest, who people would have respected, right? But unfortunately, we chose to work with the bad apples, right? Thinking that that was in our benefit. So it's not as if it was just the big bad USA against the innocent Afghan people. There were a lot of bad leaders in Afghanistan who were Afghan, who were also part of this military industrial complex. And once they saw how much they're gaining, they just liked this issue to keep continuing. But at the end, so Afghans were working in partnership with the US, and they wanted an orderly withdrawal of the US forces, which was happening. Actually, let me just point, I know we have a few minutes more time, something interesting, because a lot of times in media, we'll hear certain buzzwords and it will throw us off. So it kept saying, we need to withdraw from Afghanistan, as if there's an active combat operation going on with US soldiers. That was not the case. We only had US soldiers in training capacity. It was the Afghan National Army and commandos who were doing the battles. And there was about 45,000 loss of Afghan National Army within like 2-3 years. So they were suffering, they had the losses, they were on the front lines. And even former General Petraeus said, we just pulled the plug on the whole operation. And this is what I don't understand. This is what veterans don't understand, is that why did we invest so much, whatever good or bad it was, but right when Afghanistan could start getting on its feet and going in a better direction, we needed a transfer of power from Dr. Ghani, who was just controlling all the power. And that is what didn't happen. And they just pulled the plug, and the Taliban just came into a huge...
You could argue that although the Taliban's taken over, it's not like a full-on violent war, like as if they took over with extreme force. I've heard that basically the Afghan army was paid off by the Taliban, just kind of like, okay, we want to keep it, you will lead, but we don't want to get too bloody here. And this was interesting. This always stuck with me. This is about 10 years ago. There was some Marine, I don't know, some kind of leader of the Marines that was dealing with the communities and trying to work with the communities on the ground. And he said, one thing about the Afghan people is they're survivors. No matter what different political groups, no matter who comes in, these people just want to survive. And they will tip one side or the other without any real connection with that, whatever that ideology is, just to survive and just have their families survive. So,
well, I think
from an outside, it just looks like, well, let's just not die here.
Exactly.
It looks like that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I've seen commentary on that. Well, the Afghans didn't fight for their own nation. I would say, no, look at the numbers.
I feel like they got paid.
Look at the numbers of how many died in the last 3-4 years leading up to this, right? But when the Afghan National Leadership Command knew that the Taliban had already done a deal with the US behind their back and did not include them, and we're just going to, do you want to be a lamb that's slaughtered? No, you're going to protect your own life and your family's life. So I think they realized we don't need there were no combat really troops fighting on the ground. They were in the bases doing training. And so what I'm saying as a US government did was a huge strategic blunder. And then this messed up evacuation using a airport in the middle of a city when we had a base that we could have used, so disorganized. There were American citizens, green card holders. It was Americans coming together, veterans, volunteers, people on their computers trying to save people, because now they are in harm's way, because we just basically handed over things to the Taliban, knowing that they're supported by Pakistan ISI. So Biden and his administration are accountable for that. Why did they do it in that way? It could have been done. And here's the thing, Afghanistan wasn't asking long-term for any soldiers to be there. They wanted a peaceful handover, and there could have been cooperation. I mean, I know, Lydia, we don't like troops, but...
Mariam, what could have been done differently? Or what should we do now? I mean, what can we do?
Well, let's just take it back a couple of years, because this is a case where we can blame Trump and Biden. President Trump started this back deal negotiations as if it was a business deal, and then Biden just finished it off. And it was one of the few decisions that President Biden didn't do the opposite of Trump, as I was hoping. I think there was just a hasty thinking that, oh, you know what, it's going to be the anniversary of 9/11. Let's just have a ceremony where we can say that the last US troop left. And sometimes when we're trying to do something, thinking we're going to get a result, we create these other series of problems for ourselves. So there had been this negotiation going on, this kind of peace negotiation for the past 2 years. We had an envoy, he failed miserably to get the parties to come to an agreement. But when it started going in that direction, then President Trump authorized him to meet with the Taliban by themselves, without the Afghan government, without civil society, which emboldened the Taliban. And they thought they're more important, which is what happened. And they started making more demands. So they said, you have to release 5,000 prisoners, and then we will negotiate. The Taliban were actually very good negotiators. Everything they demanded, they were very consistent. Afghan government was against it. And that was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and that happened. Well, guess what? A lot of those prisoners became fighters with the Taliban. They did not lay down arms and come to peace. And so we worked with the Taliban, who has been supported by Pakistan ISI. There is a lot of accounts firsthand of that fact, because they would not have the access. So if the Taliban are stationed in Pakistan, where are they going to get the permission to have arms and weapons, right? And all this, it lack access to intelligence. And so when we did that, the Taliban just got more and more powerful. And when President Biden came in, he said, oh, I'm just going to continue this this withdrawal plan. But nobody really talked about what that meant. It was April, it was supposed to be actually May. And so what they told the Taliban kept saying, we want all the US soldiers out. And instead of us negotiating for what we had built up for the good of the Afghan people, we just kept giving the Taliban all of their demands. So what happened is, because I was there too when it was happening that day, the Taliban just took over Kabul. President Ghani had said, I'm never going to leave. And what did he do? He got onto a plane and left. And now he's in the Dubai with questionable amounts of money.
Embarrassing. Yeah.
And people say, you know what? Our intelligence service must have known about it and must have negotiated that with him, because he wouldn't have done it unless he thought that the US is not.
Got a green light. Yeah.
Yes. Let's put 2 and 2 together, and some things that we have to just use our logic. So when that happened, the Taliban just came into Kabul. Now, the only good thing was there wasn't any killing and fighting that ruined Kabul like in the early 90s, but it's still kind of early in the process. So what happened is then after we kind of give the whole power, there should have been a transition to an interim government. If that had happened, none of this would be happening right now. It was a matter of simple diplomacy and using some political logic to say, why should we give things over? And they say, oh, by the way, can I come back and get my 5,000 US citizens? I'm appalled, Lydia. I usually hold my emotions together better, but I am so angry that they did this. Do you know how many people they put at risk? And they said, oh, we told all the green card holders and the US citizens, they were citizens from around the world. I did not even know that there were this many countries. There were, still Japanese and Danes and Swedes on development projects. Yes, were there spies running around? Yes, every country has that, and they do that to collect their own intelligence. But for the most part, it was the development community there. They had a lot of projects, a lot of progress was being made. We were just at the point where we had some good leadership. If Biden's team had just gotten the interim government with different people, not the same warlords from the past, the few little good Taliban who could say, okay, I just want to know US troops are not going to always be in this country, but not the Haqqani network. So Haqqani was in Guantanamo, which that is a different issue. That was mishandled, and we created a bunch of new enemies there.
Right.
So he's staunchly against the US, and they're the ones mostly going after people who work with the US. But Lydia, to this day, I'm actually got a phone call, at 7:30 with individuals, Americans working on operations to get Afghan allies out there. We still have citizens, we still have green card holders. State Department is not giving the right information. It is so irresponsible. If the Biden administration knew that, look, we're going to hold to our August 31st deadline. We're not going to have anyone there to protect. We're closing our embassy, which created a whole host of other problems for Afghans to get visas who even qualified. So we will have a plan to tell all these NGOs, right? And to let them know that they should leave, because we're not going to be here at that time. They did not do that. It was like a shock. Like you're there working in your office one day and all of this just happens and you didn't have any notice that this was going to happen. So yes, for example, if the US government had properly told people we're not going to be here and they chose to stay, then they're there at their own risk. And that was not the case. So there are now veterans groups, private groups, Lydia, chartering planes to get flights out to second countries now. Doha became this processing center. Oh, where was Doha? Was where the Taliban had an office. And what we saw, those images that, again, I think has seared in people's minds of those planes leaving. And I can't believe that those pilots would take off with people on them. Like there was no one shooting at those planes. They could have stopped. How is it our military was there and where they're not, they're allowing people to be running around a plane, you right? There were things that were done that were irresponsible to human life. And we saw, and I was talking to some people who said, do you think those people just didn't have the common sense that they would fall off that airplane? And most people were like, they probably just thought that if they held on, they'd open the doors. That's how desperate they were. Desperate were.
I have a question. Was it Blackwater or the guy that was, what's his name? Voss's brother, head of Blackwater. I mean, were there private groups that were offering money if people had the resources to leave on their own? They'd be something like 60% occupy these planes. So there was basically a side hustle that was going along as well as this is going on, which is,
you know what's going on, because what happened is after August, a little bit before August 31st, there were some private charters that
right.
different entities were funding, and it was a matter of whatever connections you had, right? You were just calling people, emailing them, and you were
$6,000. Was it 6,000 or you know?
Well, that was separate.
That's separate. Okay.
That's Eric Prince's Blackwater.
Yeah, that piece of shit.
That's something that I think he did. There were others. See, whenever you have problem, then some people take advantage of it. There were others that they raised millions of dollars on social media, like evacuate all these Afghans. Some of them did good with it, some didn't. And I think those bad weeds got weeded out. What's left is a few very good operations that are raising money and are still trying to evac people to second countries so they won't be killed. And in that time, they can process to the US or another country that will take them. And so that's what is going on right now for the most part. But in Afghanistan, let's talk about the Afghan people who had nothing to do with any of this politically. I mean, they're facing food shortages right now. Right. Winter is approaching. You know, I read an interesting quote in one article that said, you know, taking over government is a much different thing than running one. And the Taliban are not equipped to run a government. The Kabul might lose electricity and black out. And I'm just so afraid for those poor children and women that we're, you know, our foundation, Nooristan Foundation, has 3 programs. We had a street children program. We were taking children from the streets, giving them a stipend. And you should see within a few even weeks and months, these children were just changing. They had hope for the future. They're so bright. And most of them are still coming. In the first days when the Taliban came, they were still coming to their classes. So those are the people that I'm afraid for right now.
So what do you think the chances are that it will be like a Vietnam, where it's just going to be more chaos after America pulls out, but then ultimately people are just exhausted and they're like, you know what, we're just kind of done with this. I mean, do you think the dust will settle even if we lose a generation here?
You know, many different things can happen based on what political decisions are made now. I was talking to someone today and we said, you know, Pakistan probably just doesn't want the ISI, even though they're recognizing the head of Pakistan's ISI came into Kabul and was having tea right when there was still some resistance, internal resistance movement left. And so obviously they're recognizing them, but it may not be in their interest for others to recognize them. So it can kind of be in this like weak situation and it can be easily controlled, right? Some governments want to work with the Taliban, and here's the problem and here's the challenge. So if we say, you know, we put out our banner, let's sanction the Taliban, which a lot of Afghan Americans doing, don't recognize them. Like you said, 5 days later, they could forget about what's going on there. So what happens to the people if they can't get access to money? If the Taliban don't have access, at this point, the US government allowed them to come in, right?
Right.
So what are we doing with sanctions? We should just never let it happen. Because if they can't govern and their money is still blocked, because a lot of their money was in the US bank accounts, they'll say, well, the US prevented us from getting money that was going to help you. It just creates more resentment from people. Like imagine they're starving and they're like, US left us. And okay, now you brought these fanatics to rule us, but then you are blocking them and they're blaming it on you. So the people, the innocent people, get caught in the mess of all this blame game. So we have to find resolutions to allow those
I have
people
another,
to at least live.
I have another hypothetical question, because I know that there's a lot of projections about actual water wars between India and Pakistan as we're seeing these was it Himalayan glaciers melting? I mean, just all these sources. Where's as we're talking about, like, you know, things, environmental issues in the future, where does Afghanistan get most of its water supply from? Do you know?
Yeah, interestingly, I had worked on this issue many years ago when I was counsel to the Afghan embassy, because riparian rights, as they're called, were always quite contentious, because Afghanistan actually, and this is what I learned back then, is that the land underneath, you know, when you look at the water flow, is actually tilted. So the waters come from the top of the Himalayan mountains, they flow through Afghanistan, and then Iran and Pakistan need them because they're, you know, it flows. And so Afghanistan was able to negotiate rights with Iran and Pakistan. Sometimes they probably gave too much, in my opinion. They just weren't as savvy to negotiate, but there weren't a lot of wars about the water issue. But Pakistan, they were allowing people to go in and cut the timber in the northeast side, which is where Nooristan province is. So there was, you know, environmentally, that was not good at all for the country. But, you know, the water issues for Afghanistan, Afghanistan's rivers, you know, unless there's, you know, years where there's less rainfall, less river flow, then because 12% is agricultural land, then it affects the farmers. And when it affects the farmers, if there's droughts, then there's less food, because Afghanistan used to be self-sufficient for food. They weren't, you know, they didn't have to import like wheat and basic food supplies. It was called the breadbasket of Central Asia. It has some of the best fruits and vegetables, and they were exporting and dried fruits and nuts. It could be such a flourishing place, but unfortunately, geopolitically, that has held it back.
How do you keep positive when you are up against such immense hardship? Because you have, not only are you a legal scholar and a lawyer, and you have your foundations, and you work in immigration and copyright and trademark, you have businesses that you
a little bit,
you do so much for so many people. How do you maintain your positivity through all this?
For myself, in terms of remaining positive, I feel grateful. I feel grateful that I ended up in this country. My father was getting his PhD, so we happened to come visit when the Soviet Union invaded. And I thought I was going on a vacation to visit my father at the time. I thought I'm going back to what was my home at that time. And our life went into a different direction, and we got political asylum. So we're like in a small class of refugees that are really political asylees. And looking at the opportunities, as much as we have problems in this country and certain people misuse our government to take advantage of things for themselves, for resources, it's just greed and selfishness, and they're thinking about their own small circle and themselves. But for the most part, I believe this country's constitution, the structure that we have, as much as there's discrimination, there's inequality, it still gives us a good chance to have a voice, to have freedom of conscience, how we can share our ideas, and how I was able to do that and question things. It gave me a space. So I worked at the White House as an intern. I was able to work on that United Nations project. I feel like in this country, the freedom that we have to at least be who we are, whether someone doesn't like it or not, is such a precious gift. So that keeps me going, because I say, if I'm here, and the first time actually that I went back to Afghanistan, it was that moment when I landed and I looked around, and I'd always felt like I'm not really American, right? I came here from somewhere else, even though I really loved the history and the government and the opportunities. But when I went back, and I was about 28 years old, I said, I'm not Afghan, I'm actually American, right? Because I was thinking differently from people there. And the men there were treating me like let's say a third gender, like, okay, you're an Afghan woman, but you're not really an Afghan woman, so those same rules don't apply. And actually, they were very open with me. Afghan men, they just worry about what the other men say. But once you start talking and having dialogue with them, they're actually very open-minded. Most of the fathers, including ours, always wanted us to have an education. And they just, once they have access to information and people and travel, their world opens up. And inherently, though, their minds are not like as dark as people would think that is. But I think what's kept me positive, because I've had moments, I mean, this past month, where I have cried because I have felt like I'm having a funeral for a country, if that makes sense. Like a country has died, and I'm trying to, because I was thinking, oh, I was supposed to go back and meet the street children. I never got to go to that little music place. There were little few coffee shops, right? I wanted to go order clothes from that place. And, you know, some of those people and places may be there, but it's like a country was dying, and you know, people were needing to be saved and evacuated. But that's what it is, gratefulness and feeling appreciative of what I have here keeps me going.
I understand exactly what you're saying, because I feel like there is so much dying in this country, and it is not even comparable to so many other places, not just Afghanistan. We have, as have other countries, created so many refugees right now. The immigration situation it's so sad, you know, and the smuggling of people and people just desperate to get out of desperate places. And this country having been founded on immigrants, there are no real Americans. We killed them all. It's just, I feel too that this country has got to stop the murder here and the export of war. And I remain, I can't say hopeful, I remain vocal, because I could wish it's going to stop, but I still feel the problem is too many of the wrong men are in positions of power. So now let's speak about a powerful woman who's using art and music and literature to remain hopeful in her own life. Hi, Zohra. Now, Zohra, your sister, I love the both of you. Zohra has written about songwriting and various cultural concerns for various magazines, the fourth daughter from a family, we've had two, of Afghan refugees. And with your family, you've, you know, built auto shops, hair salons, restaurants, international businesses, Afghan charities, but also you do music. And actually we have some songs coming out soon together on your upcoming projects. And hi, Zohra, glad you're here.
Thank you for having us. And I just want to say, and Mariam knows this, I've been a huge Miss, I call you Miss Lydia. I refuse to do anything less formal than that, because I just have such an immense respect and love for your work. And yeah, the spirit I knew that you have and have shown, I've felt it since I was 12, 13 years old. And I mean, you and Mariam, as different and from different parts, walks of life, just different backgrounds, and are very similar in that way. Like forces of nature, like little bits of Mother Nature, I call y'all. And I appreciate what you do, because I'm like, you know, just standing on the shoulders of giants, I think, honestly. And I say that without any, like, I know I am, you know, humble by nature.
By the way, I think you're maybe 1 inch taller than I am. I ain't no giant now. I'm just as tiny as you are. Forget about it.
Yeah, I wear a lot. I think we're actually the same.
I think we wear the same clothes quite often.
I know.
Once you were telling me about one of the things you do during the day, we usually see each other at night, and you revealed to me, and I can't get this image out of my head because it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the Western exterminator sign in Los Angeles, of, you know, that has like this guy holding a big hammer ready to squash a mouse. And you said that, yeah, I kind of run like a Jiffy Lube. I'm like, a Jiffy Lube? Is there a big picture of you on? I'm like, what do you mean you run like a shop that does oil change? You help run a shop that does oil change. I just thought it was so amazing. I'm like, what are you talking about? So and I just wanted this. I wanted to see a cutout of you, just like we have the cleanest oil. And
I actually had to get counsel from Mariam. I was doing. I had been working at these quick lubes since I was 12. It's much younger than one should be when they work. But as far, you know, when you're a child of refugees, even if they're from the academia class, they still believe in just, you know, getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and appreciating I think because I was born in the States, the only one in my family who hadn't experienced a taste of the motherland that we were supposed to eventually go back to. I was primed for this exodus, I guess, from the US once it was safe to go back. So I liken it to being like a child of a Jehovah's Witness, where it's almost fatalistic. Like, don't think about your future. This is going to change, Zohra. So I think setting these like structural things to teach me like about hard work and what things can be like for, and what they were like for us as well. It's not like we were coming, like I wasn't leaving like my mansion and like to go work at this place. We were building, pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps as well.
But the point of these businesses that you were involved in was actually to give immigrants jobs, were to help support people, help support other refugees.
Yeah, just so you know, definitely on the books. We still have one shop remaining, and I just the family endeavors have always been at the heart of it, humanitarian endeavors. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to shine a halo, but it's true. And I think the pull that we've all had and is been to just never, I hate to say never forget. I know that it's almost like TM, like for something else, but for us, it's been, work to help those who got left behind, those who didn't have the fortune that we've had. And this is why I understand tribalism, etc., because there is something to it. There is something about looking after your own. And when I say your own, I also mean that through like the almost underground music and arts.
Well, the coven looks after our own.
Exactly. The coven, like most of the people I dearly admire, even in New York, have been like people who bring culture together, like and Miss Lydia, I've introduced you to some of those people. Just I really have an immense respect for band together for the betterment of the whole.
Well, as Mariam was saying before, I mean, Afghanistan has a rich previous culture of literature, of art, of music, of visual
poetry,
art, poetry.
Yeah.
And so
food.
Well, that's why I was involved in the restaurant. Like we had this tea house endeavor it was so successful, and it makes my heart shine. Everything is done as a labor of love. And so many veterans, we haven't talked about this a lot, but I do have a lot of love and respect for the troops, of the people who went out there from this country who had the best of intentions.
Of course. Hey, it's the same reason I have passion for some cops. Not every cop decides to become one because they want to be an asshole. The system is an asshole, which turns a lot of other people into the asshole. So
exactly.
I mean, you don't just decide to do something that's going to threaten your life every day because some people do have what they consider a moral duty. Now let's talk about your moral duty to music. And does your culture have, because the music that you make, I mean, you've made different kinds of music, but now your most recent stuff that you're going to be releasing, I know you're releasing 2 records coming up in the new year, and one is more a compilation and one is your new solo album. And what fascinated me about the music is that it's, well, and this is weird to say, but it's electronic, but there's something else going on. Your vocals are so amazing, and it's really hard electronics, which I'm not saying, I just don't know that many women in the field of electronic music that do something so aggressive and in that format. And then with your voice, it's a really interesting mix. And when we did that one song together, and it was right after somebody had been beheaded in a temple again, and I asked you if you thought we might be beheaded, because one of the lines is, who's the fucking God that told you to kill for him?
Right. I mean, and what I loved about that is it's not a line I would have ever thought or deliver myself, but having this one presence. So this solo record actually, strangely, just serendipitously, is the first record I really tackle the what I have felt that I kind of have repressed for different reasons about the American presence in Afghanistan, because those are 2 of my identities that it clashed in a way that, like, I knew in the beginning, it was like there needed to be this intervention, but it was also very strange to have, like, growing up in the South, friends of mine that are like, I'm going to, do you want me to get you a robot? Or like when I'm out in Afghanistan, like I hadn't even been there yet. And so I had this, like, just this strange sort of tug of war of those two identities that I just never wanted to meet in the middle, because they just, like, at the end of the day, they just decided they hate Britain. I know that sounds very controversial. At the end of the day, I've come to learn that they're not the people, obviously. Like
well, where did colonialization start? I mean, it didn't start with America. We just took it further than just about anybody else.
Exactly. So, and that's actually how I kind of strangely let myself simmer down a little bit. I even for a while in 2016 was angry at my not knowing the Nooristani language or Pashtun, because I'm like, I speak the language of the end, like, and because
I invented a new language for you to speak, which is Farfisi, which is a cross between your voice and the Farfisa organ.
And a Farfisa organ.
Farfisa.
It's just me singing Sparks records in Farsi.
I love
That's
it.
It have to be. But yeah, so this record that I kind of stitched together just worked on myself for the last 3 years, and later Mr. Ben Greenberg of Uniform, a great producer, he helped kind of see the vision through, and we were like, something's missing. And I was like, let me call Miss Lydia. And he's like, I think we can make room for
you could squeeze me in a little bit.
Yeah. No, we were, ever so pleased. I was like, I would just love to have you on this. It just felt like that one element was missing. So I think the way I've approached electronics, because I did previously play guitar. I definitely I wouldn't hire myself to be in anyone else's band, but I played it.
Honey, nobody would hire me to be in their band either, so don't worry about it.
I know, but the difference is that I'm like, I wish that I could do this in a way of like Mingus plays piano, but really at the end of the day, in the back of my head, I'm like, Miss Lydia Lunch and Teenage Jesus plays guitar.
Well, I can't do it. What? Unfortunately, history has not repeated that, because one of those was enough.
You can.
Honey, the more you know, the less you get it. What can I say?
Musically, when Zohra was growing up, our father had a harmonium and a rabab, which is a stringed instrument. And he would play those, almost every other weekend at a family gathering. So at most family gatherings with Afghans, there'll be like one or two musicians or people who love music that will be the live entertainment, right? And so they have different instruments that they learn to play. And my father had learned from some music teachers, because in Afghanistan, there was a famous music street. And one of the very tragic things that happened this last 2 weeks is the Taliban were like, I can't even believe they're doing this, but that's why I know they're from the outside. That's when this is not like supported by Afghans, but took a lot of their instruments, destroyed them. And I got pictures, and it made me so angry, because their instruments are their lifeline. That's how they make money if they perform. And there's a group of artists from around the world, Afghan, who raised enough money with Afghan business people to try to get them out. So they're currently working. So that music street, unfortunately, a lot of the people now have left or trying to leave. But so music has always been part of Afghan culture, not just at a concert or a wedding, but just like every day and every week.
And I think that Mariam brings up a great point, which is the way I was raised around music is some of my favorite artists, Afghan artists, who you can hear them talking to other people as they're playing. They're like, it's not a performative thing. What I realized about myself in terms of my voice being what it is, how I could structure it in a way that wasn't where, not that I have a problem with dance coupled with, like, I didn't want it to be performative and so like rehearsed and so pristine. There's a raw edge of it being live, with the presence of people. It was very difficult to maintain a band in New York City without a certain funding and energy, and kind of endeavored with the electronics, because I do love what some analog instrument, like I love these elements, and I just had to figure out how to harness it to make the kind of sounds and to eventually get to the energy vocally, which I wanted to use like the extended vocal technique, which was founded by Alfred Wolsham after the First World War, when he decided after what he saw and what he went through in the trenches, that the Italian sort of system, which is beautiful and it has a place, could not get to the marrow of what he was feeling. So in some, like in Nooristan, where half of our bloodline comes from, it has the only area in that part of Asia that has a tonal singing, where you're multi-timbered like vocals, and there's these just like folk traditions of being able to harness voice, and the layman will just credit to Demon Glass, God bless, but that's not where it started and it's not where it's ending. So
Goddess bless, it's not where it's ending.
And just one really quick note, at the Zohra saw it as well, the Museum of Natural History in New York shows about, I think it was 6-7 instruments that, if you trace their roots, came from what's now modern day Afghanistan.
And which they credited
so
to.
I don't want the image of Afghanistan. My TED talk that I did in Afghanistan was rebranding the country, because the brand got associated, unfortunately, with terrorism and war. But what's really underneath it is a beautiful country that has a lot of orchards and beautiful mountains and valleys and rivers, a lot of ecotourism, but as well as a beautiful culture of music, poetry, dance, fashion. They make really
and culturally
beautiful handmade
beautiful
clothes
people.
Well,
and
they're
what's
into
wonderful,
sports, right? They're welcoming. They love guests.
Yeah.
So Afghans love having guests. So they
Miss
love
Lydia
having all kinds
as
of
well.
people from around the
That's
world.
true. It must be the Afghanistan, you mean. Well, and exactly. And the thing is, America exports this Hollywood version of ourselves of being, so cultured, so intelligent, so beautiful, when really the underbelly of America, like a lot of countries, but really we see only what America wants, or the media wants to paint as other countries, whenever it has to do with wars we've started or wars we got into, or immigrants we don't like, something, the way they look, the way they dress, the way they sound. So America purports this image outside. It pushes this image of this Hollywood ideal, when underneath the dirty white underbelly is full of what we have been seeing in the past 5 years. So in a sense, other countries that we mistake to be, terrorists and warmongers, when we are that, exporting another image. It's just, you have to dig deeper, and that's what we do, and that's why this is the Lydian Spin. And thank you so much, the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl,
We love you.
Zohra,
Thank
Mariam
you.
Atash. Now Zohra's name changed to Attack, and we will put some links up. And thank you both for
Thank you, guys.
your love, your work, and what you do.
Yes, if anybody wants to help children and women still in Afghanistan, Treasury Department allows nonprofits to still do humanitarian assistance. I confirmed that this week, and that's
Well, Mariam,
online if
send
anybody
that
wants to
stuff.
make sure.
We're going to
But
have the links up.
Yeah, we'll give the Nooristan Foundation.org. We'll give you the link, and there's a messaging feature. If anyone wants to message and they want to keep in touch with Zohra and I, they can message us through the foundation's.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Zohra, I'll
Thank
see
you
you
all.
on Friday night.
See you Friday.
Okay.
Love you guys.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.